We've learned how to write void functions like this intro function that when called did something, it printed out some information for us, and then the flow returned to line 13. And we learned how to create value returning functions like this prompt user, which when called or invoked, prompted the user for a positive integer, validated it, and then returned it. And that return value we stored into mains variable num. So now we're going to learn how to create a function that when called will accept information. We can pass it some information. And you've already used this kind of function, srand, for seeding our random number generator. So if you remember when you use the random function, it starts at the same integer every time you run your program. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to comment these out for a minute. When I run this program, you can see that 16807 is printed. And if I run it again, 16. So every time I run it, rand starts at the same integer. So we can change that by calling a function called srand, and we can pass it a starting number, and I'm going to start it at the current time. And to access time, I'm going to include ctime. Now when I run my program, you can see that a bigger number is printed, and notice that it ends in 70. And when I run it again, it ended in 26. So what srand did is it accepted some information. We passed it information, and it did something with that time value. And what it did is it set the starting point for our random number generator. But what you notice is the call to srand did not return any information. So this must be a void function, because if it were to return information, we would have to do something with it. Rand returns a number, so we printed it out. Our prompt user returned an integer, so we stored it in a variable. We just are calling srand, so it must be a void function. So I'm going to back all this out, and we're going to make a function that will be passed the value of num, and it will print out the message if the number is even or odd. And I think what I'll call this function is check even odd. And we're going to pass it num. So we're going to take a copy of what is stored in num after the user enters an integer, and then we're going to send a copy of that value to this function, and the function will do all of this work for us. So I'm going to go down here and I'll make this function. This function will not return any information, so this will be a void function. So call this check even odd. But we're going to be passing information to it. You notice that I'm putting something in between the parentheses here, and not here and not here. When you pass information to a function, you have to create a variable to hold that information. So in our parentheses, I'm going to create what's called a parameter. And I'm going to create a parameter, and I'm just going to call it n. And then I'm going to make my block for my code. I'm going to cut this code out and put it in here. Okay, so here's the call to check even odd. I'm going to pass it a copy of num. Whatever is stored in num at the time that I call check even odd will be stored in this parameter variable n. So if I have num up here in main and it has the number 9, a copy of 9 will be sent to this function, and it will be stored into a variable called n. So these are two different variables in memory. And then when I hop in, it's going to execute line 27. But when I copied this code from main, I was referring to the variable called num. But in here, I'm going to call it n. So I'm going to have to make those changes in my function. So I'm going to just say if n mod 2 is equal to 0, then cout n is even, else cout n is odd. And since this is a void function, remember I'm not going to have a return. I can type in the word return like that, but I cannot return any information. So this return just means go back to wherever I was called from, and it's implicitly put there without explicitly typing it. So I'll go ahead and run this program, and you see I get an error because I forgot to include the function prototype at the top. So I'm going to go to the top, and in my function prototype section, I'll say void check even odd. Now in the parentheses, I have to specify the type of information I'm going to be passing. I'm going to pass it an int. You can specify the variable name, but you don't have to in the prototype. You can just specify the type of information. You don't have to be specific with the variable name. And then down in the function declaration, we have to specify a variable to hold the information that's going to be passed. So now I'm ready to run this and enter a positive integer. I'll say 8, and 8 is even because when I entered 8, 8 was stored in this variable num. The copy of num was placed into this parameter n, and then n was checked if it were even. It printed out an is even message, else is odd. And then flow returns back up to line 19, then line 21 executes. So that is an example of a void function that accepts information.